Hello and welcome to another episode of Gear Toward Gear. My name is Sean and I am so glad you're here. Today we're taking a look at what I think is a spectacular knife, an unbelievable knife, one that surprised the hell out of me in the best way possible. It's so good, and that is the Three Rivers Manufacturing Atom, or the TRM Atom. These have been out for a while. It's not anything that's particularly brand new, but I just had the opportunity to get one in my hands, and this was sent to me on loan by my good buddy JD of Shadowborn Hanks. I know a lot of you guys know JD, super good dude, and he reached out and said, you need to experience this knife. You need this in your life. You want me to send it to you to check out and review? And I couldn't turn him down because he was really kind of hyping the knife, and it's one that I was very familiar with, and it's been an absolute pleasure. This is the knife, of all the knives that I've had on loan, whether it's through a pass around group, sometimes it's like, man, I wish I could keep this one, and you don't want to send it away. I've never felt that more strongly than with this knife. I'll eventually probably get one for myself, but this knife is so good. I want to keep carrying it. I want to keep using it. I want to keep cutting with it because it performs so stinking well. It's something else. So let's get the kind of the short version out of the way as we typically would. We'll do some size comparisons, talk about price, and then we'll go into a little more detail. I did also fully disassemble this knife and learned a couple things that I did not know prior to disassembling it. I probably should have watched a video about that first, but we're looking at the TRM Atom, as I mentioned. It is so overall length, we're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, just over 8 inches in overall length. So a solid medium large knife, I would say. The handle material is micarta. This is a ruby red micarta. Your blade steel is going to be 20 CV, blade length 3.5 inches with a 3.25 inch sharpened cutting edge. It is a liner lock. It runs on phosphor bronze washers, deploys with dual thumb studs, is configured for tip-up, right-handed carry only, and the price tag is about $200. And that may seem pricey. A lot of people would never spend that much on a knife. I get it, but it is worth every penny. It just is. And I'll explain some of the reasons, obviously, behind why I would say that. So let's just kind of take a flyby here, get a little closer, look at that micarta. It looks really excellent, really high-quality stuff. There's our pocket clip, nice deep carry titanium clip. Flow through construction with some barrel spacers. There's our blade. Great blade shape. Nice blade finish. Really, really fine stone wash. And there it is. TRM USA 20 CV, again, is blade steel. And everything about this is made in the USA, including things like the micarta and all that good stuff. And there's a lot of titanium parts to this knife that you wouldn't necessarily think are titanium just looking at it, which we will talk about. So that's kind of the short version. $200, a little over 8 inches overall with about a 3.25 inch cutting edge. So let's do some size comparisons. Here's an Ontario Wrap Model 1. This is going to be longer, of course, and it's going to be longer by about 1/2 inch. So there's your Wrap 1. Let's bring in a Benchmade. Here's a 940. And this is going to be a bit shorter, maybe 1/8 of an inch shorter than the Atom. The Atom, however, is going to have more of a sharpened cutting edge than the Rat is going to have, and about the same as the 940. So let's get rid of those two. And let's bring in a Spyderco Paramilitary 2. So the PM2 is longer, obviously, and it's longer by almost exactly 1/4 of an inch. So like when I'm looking straight down, when I kind of move my head over to where my hand is, it is about 1/4 of an inch longer. So the overall length is not significantly different. These are absolutely in the same size class in terms of overall length. So that's a pretty good comparison. You're going to get more sharpened cutting edge again on the Atom than you will on the PM2. So there's another size comparison for you. As far as thickness, I'll just do a couple comparisons real quick to demonstrate how thin this is. And we'll start with a Benchmade Bug Out. They are pretty darn close. As a matter of fact, depending on which handle scale material you were to choose on your atom, it may even be a little thinner than a bug out, but they're pretty close. I think in this case they're about even. So super thin. Here's a cold steel code 4, which are known for being stupid thin, and those are super close as well. So a very thin knife. It's 0.39 inches in thickness. So just a really thin knife. The weight on this guy is 2.9 ounces if I'm not mistaken. And to ensure that I'm not mistaken, we're going to confirm that. It's under 3 ounces. I know that. So let's get an exact weight. 2.91. All right. Let's compare that just for fun to the PM2. 3.66. So considerably lighter than a Paramilitary 2, which are, again, very close in overall length. So there's your size comparisons, your weight, your width, and your price point. So let's get a little more in depth, a little more intimate with this guy, and let's start with the blade. So the blade, again, is 3.5 inches in length with a 3.25 inch cutting edge. The blade finish on this is this just unbelievably gorgeous, super fine stone wash. And it almost has, it feels like glass. It's just glassy smooth. 20 CV steel is that way. Like, it takes certain finishes really well. Here's a Benchmade bug out in 20 CV, and it has a stone wash as well, but it has that same, I don't know, it just feels glass-like. It's just really interesting, and it looks unbelievable. It's one of the better blade finishes that I've ever seen ever on a knife ever. It's fantastic. So the finish is unbelievable. The blade shape, I love that drop point that's nice and pointy. The blade stock is 0.9 inches, so it's like 2.25 millimeters. So it's a pretty thin blade stock. It's going to be more in line with something like the bug out, which is a much smaller knife, but a very similar blade stock thickness. And if we compare that to the Paramilitary 2, the PM2 is going to be substantially thicker. Of course, it tapers, but you can see the full thickness of the stock up here near my finger. It is substantially thicker than the Atom. So that's going to contribute to the performance of this knife. It cuts so well, and that's what we want our knives to do, is cut. So you've got a thin blade stock. It is a flat grind, which I always prefer a hollow grind personally, but because the blade stock is already starting out pretty thin, it gets down to about 18 thousandths behind the edge as I measured it with my micrometer. So 18 thousandths for a production flat ground knife is actually pretty darn good. Now there are knives out there that get closer to like 10 thousandths behind the edge, even as low as like 8 thousandths behind the edge, but 18 thousandths is still respectably thin. So this thing performs just fantastically. So I really love that. I really like the dual thumb studs. I love the shape. They're very functional. It makes me wonder why we would ever use something like this ever again, kind of these stepped thumb studs, because these things just grab your thumb, they're comfy, and they make for a very consistent deployment, and those are going to be made from titanium. And TRM has those custom made for this particular knife. So that is basically what we're looking at as far as the blade. I did mention the steel a couple times as 20 CV. Very corrosion resistant. It's also very wear resistant, so it's going to help with the edge retention. So definitely a very good production steel in 20 CV. So that's the blade. Let's look at the handle. The material in this case, being micarta, looks fantastic. The color is amazing. The quality is excellent. This is USA made micarta, again, that is made for TRM for these knives, and it's executed so well. So well. So the material is fantastic. Again, you can get it in G10, carbon fiber, but this particular rose or ruby red micarta, I think is just gorgeous. The shape, I think, is aesthetically pleasing. It's nice and comfy. It contours to your palm pretty nicely. I wear an extra large size glove, and I've got plenty of room for a full grip. And I think most people, just based on the shape, there's not a ton going on. As I often say, there's not a ton going on, right? So it's not going to be terribly uncomfortable, I don't think, for anybody. Whereas something like this cold steel here, you have got finger grooves, right? So if you have really, really big fingers or really, really tiny fingers, that could fundamentally make this knife uncomfortable for you. I don't think that's going to be the case with the TRM Atom. I think it's a pretty ergonomic knife, so no issues with the handle whatsoever. Let's take a look at the pocket clip while we're down here. It is titanium, is a loop over deep carry clip. It carries so well in the pocket. I do have one little gripe about the clip that I'll touch on in a second. It is nested into the micarta. The hardware is not, but it's really generously sized. I don't even know that it would need to be as big as it is, but this is gonna, like, if you wear thick tactical pants, like, this is gonna go over those no problem. The only issue I had with it is the retention coming out of the pocket. It's just a little too easy for me to draw out of the pocket. I would like this to be a little more stiff. That's part of that's personal preference, but I think it just needs to be bent a little bit to tighten it up. At least that's what I would do if it were mine. So one little gripe, but that can be fixed. So not a huge deal. Again, we do have some barrel spacer kind of standoffs back here towards the rear, and that's the handle. All right, so let's talk about the lockup and the lock. So we've got a liner lock, as you can see. It is locking up pretty early. Very, very strong though. It's a very strong lockup. There's no blade play in any direction. I can get some flex, but that is not true side-to-side play. That's literally the blade flexing because it's such a thin blade stock. I can actually make it flex if I want to. So the lockup is super strong. As far as disengagement is concerned, you've got a pretty generous cutout there in the micarta. You've got a little bit of texturing on the liner lock itself. There's no lock stick. It just effortlessly disengages and closes right up, and it is dead center. And again, I fully disassembled this knife completely. Every part came apart, and it went back together like a puzzle, and the centering is as good, maybe, I don't know, maybe better than it was before. I mean, it was good before. There was no issues with it. But yeah, so dead center, nice strong lockup. Let's talk about the action. The action on this thing is stupid smooth considering it runs on phosphor bronze washers. It doesn't run on any fancy ball bearing washers, whether they be ceramic or stainless. It's just your basic run-of-the-mill phosphor bronze washer that we see on knives like an Ontario Rat, right? A budget knife. One thing I noticed when I disassembled this was that the washers were very, very brightly colored. They were pretty well polished at the factory, just kind of out of the box. So nice and smooth. The flipping action on this thing, or I should say flicking action, is, for me, has been 100% reliable. I haven't had any misfires. The detent is perfect. I mean, the detent for me on this is absolutely perfect. We'll hear it suck in. It's not going anywhere, but as soon as you break that detent, it just opens. It just opens, and sometimes it opens slow, depending on how much effort you give it. Other times it flies out if you want to, put some authority behind it, but it's incredibly smooth. So much so that when I disengage the liner lock, it just drops shut onto my thumbnail in one little wiggle, and it's closed. And that's typically an action or an experience that you would see with knives that are on bearings. This thing is not crazy lubricated. I added, like, I don't know, maybe a quarter of a drop of KPL when I put this back together. It's just dumb how smooth this thing is for being on washers. And I appreciate a knife that's on just basic phosphor bronze washers. Bearings are great. I have nothing against them. They make for a smooth action. They're fun to play with, but this is an example of perfection in execution of a basic design. It's kind of slab construction, bronze washers, but it's just done to a very, very high degree. So kudos to TRM for that. The action is it's just a pleasure. Let's look at the liners real quick, because this does have full liners. You can't see them kind of in this view. All you see is micarta, right? But it does have full titanium liners, and they are nested into the micarta. You can kind of see it there. So these liners here that you can see kind of near my thumb are full titanium. So that's going to contribute to the lightweightness of this knife as opposed to being steel liners. So I do like that. It also is going to add some rigidity. So, you know, you're going to get a little flex, you know, if you were to kind of squeeze near the middle, you'll get just a little bit, but not a ton. It's plenty strong, plenty secure. And I do like the fact that they are nested in there. So full titanium liners, titanium pocket clip, titanium thumb studs, and these barrel spacers back here are also titanium. So some, you know, higher end materials when we're talking like a really nice USA produced micarta, titanium, 20 CV blade steel from a company that's operating in smaller batches. It's almost like a, it's funny because I feel like nowadays, like whether it's craft beer or like artisan, like breads, like this like small batch, like organic type stuff, like that's how I feel about this knife. It's like a small batch organic knife. I know that sounds weird, but when they do them in that fashion, they really pay such close attention to their quality control and their construction and their assembly that you just get knives that are virtually flawless in their execution and in their performance. And that's what this is. It's virtually flawless as far as I'm concerned. So I'm really, really loving that. Let's cut some paper. I got a piece of paper here. Not the most scientific test. JD told me that he used this knife and carried it basically since he got it. I think for a number of weeks before he sent it to me. I've used it, gone out of my way to cut more than I need to because it's so much fun to cut with. I have not stropped it. I'll probably just very lightly strop it before I send it back, just because I'm a good guy like that. But this thing is so much fun to cut with. And that's what we use our knives for, is to cut things. And if they cut well, then, right, that's a good thing. And this thing cuts, I would say, as well or better than any knife that I've handled this year, for sure. Again, thin blade stock, pretty thin behind the edge, a nice smooth finish, like, again, that glassy finish. It just glides through material like you would not believe. Like, it shocked me. And so, like, when I would open up an Amazon box and I would take it out to the recycling bin to break it down, instead of cutting it into like 4 pieces, which is all I needed to do, I would cut it into like 50 pieces because it was just fun to cut with this knife. It just cuts. It cuts so well, and it sounds so simple. Hey, this knife cuts well. Well, duh, it's a knife. This knife should cut well. This knife should cut well. All these knives should cut well because they're knives and they have blades, and the blades should be sharp. But it's just a different experience with this knife. It truly is. It's a different experience. One thing I'll also note for you lefties is that I did watch a video that implied that this could not be deployed left-handed. So Nick Shabazz, when he reviewed this, said that he could not deploy it left-handed and that he gave it to a number of other people who are experienced handling knives, and nobody could deploy it left-handed. I found that to just not be the case. I'm not at all ambidextrous. I'm not left-handed, but I can reliably, consistently, every single time deploy this left-handed with the thumb stud. It's a non-issue. So if you're a lefty and you're looking into this knife, you know, how you carry it is going to be a consideration, but whether or not you can deploy it with the thumb stud, it's a non-issue. It's very easy to do. So I just wanted to add that quick note. Disassembly, just a couple quick things, and then we'll close this out. When I took this knife apart, just because I was curious, I wanted to see what the washers looked like specifically. I wanted to figure out why it was so damn smooth. When I took the scales off, typically what happens is you take off the 2 screws here, you take out the pivot, you push the pivot through, and you know, you're able to take the scales off both sides. With this knife, all I did is I took out these 2 screws, and this whole scale came off. I didn't have to touch the pivot. And the reason for that is that this scale literally sits on top of the pivot. It's really weird. I've never experienced that before. And that's the case on both sides. So I don't know if you can really tell by just looking at it, but literally you take these two screws out and the scale lifts over top of the pivot. And so when the scale is off, you have the kind of the skeleton of the knife in terms of the frame, and that pivot screw is still there. Then you take out the pivot screw, you can remove the blade, and as I took the scales off, the barrel spacers, one of them fell out. I actually almost lost it because it went under the couch because they're not captured from both sides, which I thought was interesting. Not a big deal, but I just thought the fact that those scales come off so easily, it was refreshing to not have to. I mean, I did because I wanted to take it down completely, but if you just wanted to swap scales, you don't have to push the pivot through, which oftentimes you do. So, for example, a scale swap on a bug out, you have to remove the pivot screw and push the pivot through the knife, put the new scales on, and get that pivot back through. With this knife, 2 screws, it lifts off, the new one goes on, 2 screws, and you're done. So I thought that was pretty excellent. I wonder if I can Spidey flick this. Probably not, because it's so close to the... Oh, booyah. That was satisfying. I hadn't tried to do that yet. But it Spidey flicks really well, actually, because it rides right up against the micarta. If you get your finger, kind of like that and just push straight up, I guess, it Spidey flicks pretty well. So there it is, the Three Rivers Manufacturing Atom. It's kind of a masterpiece of finesse. Just the design, the materials, the way it was constructed, it was thoughtful, and the end result is a knife that performs so well. So $200 may seem pricey. That's about what these were going for. That's G10 and 20 CV. What else we got here? A 940-2. This knife right here is going to cost you about $175, and that is G10 and S30V steel. Okay, so when we're talking nice USA made micarta and 20 CV for $25 more, right? We can kind of see how the value might actually be there. Same thing with the Paramilitary 2. These go for what, 160? Another $40. You're upgrading to a much better steel. In my opinion, a nicer, or at least more expensive handle material, and far better construction. So if you want a knife that basically kicks ass in every conceivable way, the TRM Atom, I think, is the knife for you, and I know it's definitely the knife for me. So I'll put all the details down below on what you would need to do to try to get your hands on one of these, because they're going to do another drop in January, and you basically have to put your name on a list, which is what I'll probably do. So I'll put all the details down below, so if you are interested and you want to get on the list and get one of these things in your hand, you'll have a good opportunity to do that, because I know they sell out pretty quick, and they're a hot commodity for sure, and for good reason, which I now understand. So there it is, the TRM Atom. Thank you guys all so much for watching. Thank you again, JD, for your generosity in sending it to me. Thank you, and I will talk to you soon.